Alex Bradley thought he built a kingdom of opportunity, but in the fluorescent glare of aisle 4, he realized he'd actually built a cage. He went undercover to find a thief, but instead, he found a woman whose broken spirit was the direct result of his own corporate success. Alex Bradley stands in his minimalist high-rise office, looking out over the city. To him, the thousands of employees in his franchises are data points on a digital dashboard. He prides himself on being a man of the people, yet he hasn't stepped foot in a store as a customer in years. When he decides to trade his tailored suit for a plain blue t-shirt and jeans, he thinks he's embarking on a simple audit of operational friction. He doesn't realize that the man looking back at him in the mirror, AJ the floor runner, is about to witness the devastating human cost of the very policies that made him a billionaire. Just before we get back to it, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. And if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed. Alex Bradley's corner office on the 47th floor was a monument to success. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the city like a conquest, and the mahogany desk between them had cost more than most people earned in a year. He sat behind it now, scrolling through the quarterly report on his tablet, watching green arrows climb upward like ivy on a trellis. Revenue up 12%. Labor costs down 8%. Customer satisfaction holding steady at 4.2 stars. The numbers sang a hymn of efficiency, and Alex conducted the orchestra with a satisfied swipe of his finger. His assistant had left the morning's correspondence in a neat stack beside his coffee, still hot, still perfect, like everything else in his carefully curated world. He barely glanced at the printed emails and formal letters. His lawyers handled the complaints. His PR team managed the praise. But then his hand stopped on something that didn't belong. A handwritten envelope. No return address. The paper was cheap, the kind you'd buy at a dollar store. And someone had written his name in shaky blue ink, Mr. Bradley, personal. He turned it over in his hands, frowning. When was the last time anyone had sent him something handwritten? His birthday cards came from Hallmark, signed by his executive team. This felt different. Dangerous, even. Alex tore it open. The letter inside was written on lined notebook paper, the edges frayed where it had been ripped from a spiral binding. The handwriting was cramped and urgent, as if the writer had been afraid of running out of space or time. Mr. Bradley, you don't know me, and I can't tell you my name because I'll lose my job. But I work at store number 1, the one you always brag about in the shareholder meetings, the flagship. You should know what really happens there. People are crying in the break room. Managers are stealing hours. We're scared all the time. You built something beautiful, but it's rotting from the inside. If you really care about us like you say in those videos, come see for yourself. Don't send someone. Come yourself, please. Alex read it twice. Then a third time. His first instinct was to dismiss it. Disgruntled employees always blamed management for their own failures, but something about the tone gnawed at him. The plea at the end, the word please, underlined so hard the pen had nearly torn through the paper. He set the letter down and looked out at the city again. From up here, the people were invisible. The streets were clean lines. The buildings were data points. He told himself he was a man of the people, that his success had created thousands of jobs, that his foundation scholarships had changed lives. But when was the last time he'd actually seen any of those lives? He picked up his phone and called his head of operations. Cancel my meetings for the next week, he said. I'm going dark. Sir? Store number 1. I'm going in undercover. No one can know. Not the regional manager, not the store director. No one. There was a pause on the other end. Are you sure that's... I need to see the truth beneath the numbers, Alex said, and ended the call. He looked at the letter one more time, then folded it carefully and slipped it into his jacket pocket, right over his heart. The transformation began in a windowless room in the basement of corporate headquarters, far from the polished marble and glass of the executive floors. Alex had never been down here before. The fluorescent lights hummed with a nervous energy, and the air smelled faintly of cleaning chemicals and old coffee. A woman named Rita from HR stood waiting with a cardboard box and an expression that suggested she thought her CEO had lost his mind. Everything goes in here, she said, holding out the box. Phone, wallet, watch, wedding ring if you're wearing one. Alex hesitated, his hand instinctively moving to his wrist where his Patek Philippe sat, a gift to himself after the company went public. It had cost $60,000. He'd worn it every day for 3 years. Everything, Rita repeated. He unclasped it slowly, feeling strangely naked as the weight left his wrist. The phone was harder. His entire life lived in that device. His calendar, his contacts, his access to the world. He powered it down and placed it in the box with a finality that made his chest tighten. Wallet too. Alex pulled out his leather billfold, thick with credit cards that had no limits, and an ID that opened doors most people didn't even know existed. He dropped it into the box and watched Rita seal it with packing tape, like she was closing a coffin. "Now the clothes," she said, handing him a plastic bag. Inside was a plain blue t-shirt with the company logo, smaller and cheaper than the ones in the marketing materials, a pair of generic jeans, and scuffed white sneakers that looked like they'd come from a discount bin. There was also a name tag, already printed, A.J. Temporary Stock Associate. Alex changed in the small bathroom attached to the room. The t-shirt was stiff and smelled like factory plastic. The jeans were too loose in the waist, and the sneakers pinched his toes. He looked at himself in the mirror and barely recognized the man staring back. Without the tailored suit, without the watch, without the confident posture that came from knowing he owned everything around him, he looked ordinary, forgettable. He tried to summon the face he wore in board meetings, the one that commanded respect, but it didn't fit anymore. AJ didn't belong in boardrooms. AJ belonged on the floor, invisible and replaceable. When he emerged, Rita handed him a worn canvas wallet. "There's $40 in here. That's what we're saying you have to your name. Bus fare, lunch money, that's it. No credit cards. No safety net." Alex opened the wallet and stared at the two $20 bills. $40. He'd spent more than that on a single cup of coffee at the artisan place near his penthouse. The weight of it, or rather the lack of weight, made something cold settle in his stomach. "What if something happens?" he asked, and immediately hated how weak his voice sounded. Rita's expression softened slightly. "Then you figure it out, like everyone else does." She handed him a bus pass and a crumpled piece of paper with an address. "Store number 1. Your shift starts at 6 a.m. tomorrow. Don't be late. They'll fire you on the spot." Alex took the paper, his hands feeling strangely empty without his phone to hold. "That's it?" "That's it." Rita picked up the sealed box containing his real life. "Good luck, AJ." He walked out of the building through the service entrance, a door he'd never used before. The street looked different from ground level. Louder. Harsher. A bus rumbled past, belching exhaust, and Alex realized with a start that he'd have to take one tomorrow. He couldn't remember the last time he'd been on public transportation. He stood there on the sidewalk, just another man in a blue shirt, and for the first time in 20 years, Alex Bradley felt vulnerable. He had no armor, no access, no power, just a name tag and $40. And the terrifying understanding that for millions of people, this wasn't a social experiment. This was life. The bus ride to store number 1 took 43 minutes, and every one of them was a lesson in humility. Alex AJ now stood pressed against the rear door because all the seats were taken, his hand gripping a greasy pole while the vehicle lurched through traffic. A woman with 2 small children juggled grocery bags and tried to keep her kids from crying. An elderly man dozed against the window, his work boots caked with dried concrete. Nobody looked at anyone else. Nobody spoke. They all wore the same expression of exhausted endurance. When AJ finally arrived at the store, the sun was barely cresting the horizon. The parking lot was empty, except for a few employee vehicles clustered near the back entrance. He'd seen this building 1,000 times in reports and presentations, always photographed from flattering angles, with happy customers streaming through automatic doors. From here, at dawn, it looked different, colder. The fluorescent lights inside gave it the sterile glow of an operating room. He pushed through the employee entrance and found himself in a narrow hallway that smelled of cardboard and floor wax. A time clock hung on the wall, surrounded by handwritten signs. "Clock in, on time or go home. No exceptions." He fumbled with his badge, scanning it with seconds to spare before 6 a.m. "You the temp?" AJ turned to find a man in his late 40s, standing with his arms crossed, a manager's badge clipped to his polo shirt. Thompson was embossed on a small nameplate. He had the build of someone who'd once been athletic, but had let it slide. And his eyes moved over AJ with all the interest one might give a broom or a mop, a tool to be used. "Yes, sir." "AJ, I'm here for. I didn't ask for your life story." Thompson cut him off, already walking away. "Follow me." AJ hurried after him through the stockroom, past towers of boxes and pallets wrapped in plastic. Thompson moved with the aggressive efficiency of someone who measured his worth in tasks completed per hour. He didn't look back to see if AJ was keeping up. They emerged onto the sales floor, and Thompson stopped abruptly in front of aisle 4. "Canned goods. Everything faces forward, labels out. Rotate stock. Old in front, new in back. You got that?" "Yes, I don't need commentary. I need work." Thompson pulled a box cutter from his pocket and tossed it to AJ, who barely caught it. "You get 2 15-minute breaks and 30 minutes for lunch. The break room is in the back. Don't abuse it. I'm watching the cameras." He started to walk away, then paused without turning around. "And AJ, I don't care where you worked before, or what sob story brought you here. You're a pair of hands. You stock shelves. You don't talk to customers unless they ask you a direct question. You don't talk to other employees. You don't lean. You don't check your phone. You work. Understand? AJ felt something hot and unfamiliar rise in his chest. Anger, maybe, or shame. I understand. Thompson walked away without another word, already barking orders into his radio at someone else. AJ stood alone in aisle 4, surrounded by thousands of cans of soup and vegetables, each one perfectly aligned by someone's invisible labor. He looked down at the box cutter in his hand and realized he didn't actually know how to stock a shelf. He'd approved the training videos. He'd signed off on the efficiency metrics. But he'd never actually done this. He knelt down and started pulling cans from a nearby cart, trying to mimic what he'd seen in corporate footage. His back began to ache within 20 minutes. His knees protested against the concrete floor. And every time he glanced up, hoping for acknowledgement or instruction, he saw other employees moving past him like ghosts, their eyes down, their faces blank. Nobody greeted him. Nobody asked if he needed help. He was invisible. And for the first time in his life, Alex Bradley understood what it meant to be nothing more than a pair of hands. 3 hours into his shift, AJ's hands were raw, and his lower back screamed with every movement. He'd rotated stock until the labels blurred together, his knees bruised from kneeling on unforgiving concrete. The store had opened at 7, and now a steady stream of customers flowed through the aisles, their carts rattling past him as if he were part of the fixtures. Thompson had walked by twice, each time without a word, his eyes scanning for infractions like a prison guard. AJ was reaching for another case of tomato sauce when he heard it, a sound so quiet he almost missed it beneath the store's ambient noise of Muzak and scanner beeps. A stifled sob, choked back but not quite silenced. He froze, his hand still on the cardboard box. The sound came again, trembling and broken, from somewhere around the corner in aisle 5. Thompson's voice echoed in his head. You don't talk to other employees. But something deeper than corporate policy pulled AJ to his feet. He abandoned his cart and walked toward the sound, his worn sneakers silent on the polished floor. He found her standing beside a cleaning cart, one hand gripping the handle, while the other pressed against her mouth as if she could physically hold the grief inside. She wore the same blue shirt he did, though hers was faded from countless washings, and her name tag read Hannah Custodial. Her eyes were red and swollen, tears streaming down her cheeks despite her desperate attempts to wipe them away. For a moment, AJ just stood there, paralyzed by the rawness of her pain. In his old life, he would have walked past, assumed someone else would handle it, convinced himself that personal problems weren't his concern. But standing here in his own blue shirt, invisible and powerless, he couldn't look away. Hey, he said softly. Are you okay? Hannah's head snapped up, her eyes wide with something that looked like fear. She wiped frantically at her face, trying to compose herself. I'm fine. I'm sorry. I'm working, Her voice cracked, and fresh tears spilled over. AJ glanced around. The aisle was empty, but he could hear Thompson's voice somewhere in the distance, sharp and commanding. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. You're not fine. What happened? I can't. Hannah shook her head, her breath coming in short gasps. I can't talk about it. If Mr. Thompson sees me crying, he'll write me up. I've already got 2 warnings this month. For what? For being too slow. For taking too long in the bathroom. She laughed bitterly, the sound wet and broken. For being human, I guess. AJ felt something cold settle in his chest. That's not, please. Hannah's voice dropped to a whisper, urgent and pleading. You're new. You don't understand how it works here. Just go back to your aisle. I'll be fine. But she wasn't fine. Her hands were shaking, and she kept glancing toward the front of the store like a trapped animal watching for predators. AJ had spent his entire career reading people across boardroom tables, and he recognized desperation when he saw it. I'm AJ, he said, making a decision that would have horrified Thompson. And I'm not going anywhere until you tell me what's wrong. Hannah stared at him, and for a moment he thought she might bolt. Then something in her seemed to break, the dam finally giving way. My daughter, she whispered. She's sick, really sick, and I can't. Her voice dissolved into sobs. I can't afford her medicine because they shorted my check again. $300 just gone. And when I asked Mr. Thompson about it, he said if I complained one more time, he'd make sure I lost my housing voucher. The words hit AJ like a physical blow. He'd approved the efficiency metrics that governed this store. He'd signed off on the labor cost reductions. He'd celebrated the 8% decrease in his quarterly report just days ago. And here was the human cost, crying in aisle 5 with a mop in her hand. How long has this been happening? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Hannah wiped her eyes, her expression shifting from grief to something harder. Something that looked like resignation. Does it matter? Nobody cares. She gestured at her name tag, at the cleaning cart, at the blue shirt that marked her as invisible. We're just the help. AJ pulled Hannah further into the aisle, away from the main thoroughfare where Thompson's cameras had the clearest view. His mind was racing, trying to reconcile the woman in front of him with the data points he'd celebrated in his office. Labor costs down 8%. He'd toasted that number with champagne. Tell me everything, he said. From the beginning, Hannah hesitated, her eyes darting toward the end of the aisle. I really can't. If someone sees us, I'll take the heat, please. Something in his voice must have convinced her, because she took a shaky breath and began. It started about 6 months ago. Mr. Thompson called me into his office and said corporate was cracking down on overtime. Said I needed to be more efficient with my hours. She laughed bitterly. But the work didn't change. The store is the same size. The messes are the same, so I started staying late, off the clock, just to finish everything. AJ felt his stomach turn. He made you work for free? Not at first. At first I just clocked out and left things undone. But then he wrote me up for poor performance. Said if I got 3 write-ups I'd be terminated. And if I got terminated... She trailed off, her voice breaking again. I have a subsidized apartment through the county. You need steady employment to keep it. If I lose this job, my daughter and I are on the street. The pieces were falling into place with sickening clarity. AJ had implemented a policy 2 years ago, requiring managers to keep labor costs within strict parameters. Bonuses were tied to efficiency metrics. He'd called it incentivizing excellence. He'd never considered what it would incentivize in practice. How many hours are you working off the clock? He asked. 10, maybe 15 a week. Sometimes more. Hannah's hands twisted together. And then last month, my daughter got sick. Really sick. The emergency room, specialists, medications we can't afford even with Medicaid. I asked Mr. Thompson if there was any way to get some overtime, just for a few weeks, to cover the bills. What did he say? Her expression hardened. He said he'd think about it. Then my next paycheck was $300 short. When I asked him about it, he said there'd been an accounting error and it would be fixed next pay period. But it wasn't. And when I pushed harder, he pulled me into his office and told me that if I made waves, he'd call my housing coordinator and tell them I'd been stealing from the store. AJ's hands clenched into fists. That's extortion. That's survival. Hannah wiped her eyes again, her voice dropping to barely a whisper. You want to know the worst part? I'm not the only one. There are 4 of us he does this to. All single mothers. All on housing assistance. He knows exactly who's vulnerable and who'll keep quiet. The fluorescent lights above them hummed, indifferent to the confession unfolding beneath them. AJ thought about Thompson's performance reviews, the ones he'd personally approved. Exceptional cost management. Consistently exceeds efficiency targets. The man had been promoted twice in 3 years. Where does the money go? AJ asked, though he already knew the answer. His bonus, I guess. Every quarter he gets a payout for keeping labor costs low. I heard him bragging about it in the break room once. Said he was saving up for a boat. Hannah's laugh was hollow. A boat, while my daughter goes without her medication. AJ felt something volcanic building in his chest. Rage so pure and focused, it threatened to burn through his carefully maintained disguise. He'd built this system. He'd created the incentives. He'd signed the policies that made Thompson's cruelty not just possible, but profitable. Hannah, he said carefully, do you have any proof? Pay stubs, text messages, anything. She looked at him like he'd suggested she fly to the moon. What good would proof do? Who would I show it to? HR? They're the ones who set the quotas. Corporate? They're the ones who give him bonuses. Her voice cracked. This system isn't broken, AJ. It's working exactly the way it was designed to work. And the terrible truth was, she was right. AJ was still processing the magnitude of Thompson's theft when Hannah spoke again, her voice quieter now, almost distant, as if she were talking to herself more than to him. The funny thing is, I wasn't supposed to be here at all. She stared at her cleaning cart, at the mop and the bottles of industrial cleaner that had become the tools of her trade. I was going to be a doctor. I had a full scholarship to state medical school. The Bradley Foundation Scholarship. Do you know it? The name hit AJ like a punch to the sternum. He forced himself to keep his expression neutral, but his heart was hammering against his ribs. I've heard of it. It was everything. Hannah's eyes went distant, remembering a different life. I was pre-med at community college, working 3 jobs just to keep my head above water after my daughter was born. Then I got the letter saying I'd been selected. Full tuition, stipend for books and living expenses, mentorship program. I cried for an hour straight. I thought, her voice caught, I thought we were finally going to make it. AJ's mouth had gone dry. What happened? 6 weeks before classes started, I got another letter. Said the scholarship was being, quote, restructured for administrative efficiency. They cut the program from 50 students to 30. I was number 37 on the list. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. They said I could reapply next year, but by then I'd lost my spot at the medical school. And the next year, my daughter got diagnosed with asthma, and I couldn't afford to not work full-time, so... She gestured at herself, at the blue shirt, and the name tag, and the mop. Here I am. The world seemed to tilt beneath AJ's feet. He remembered that meeting. God help him, he remembered it clearly now. It had been 3 years ago, in a conference room with his foundation director and the CFO. They'd been reviewing the scholarship program's budget, looking for places to trim expenses. The director had suggested reducing the number of recipients to lower administrative overhead. Fewer students meant fewer mentors to pay, fewer progress reports to process, fewer complications. How much will we save? AJ had asked. About $40,000 annually. It's only 0.01% of the foundation's total budget, but do it, he'd said, not even looking up from his tablet. Efficiency matters at every level. He'd signed the authorization that afternoon. $40,000. He'd spent more than that on the marble countertops in his penthouse kitchen. And he'd never once thought about the 37 people whose names had been crossed off a list. Hannah, he said slowly, his voice sounding strange in his own ears. What's your last name? She looked at him oddly. Matthews. Why? Hannah Matthews. The name was in the files. He'd seen it in the spreadsheet. Just another row of data to be eliminated in the name of operational efficiency. He'd never thought of her as a person with a daughter, with dreams, with a future that his signature had casually erased. Are you okay? Hannah asked, peering at him with concern. You look like you're going to be sick. He was going to be sick. The fluorescent lights seemed too bright, the air too thin. Every decision he'd made from his gold-plated office, every policy he'd approved without a second thought, every efficiency metric he'd celebrated, they all had names. They all had faces. They all had Hannah Matthews standing in aisle 5, crying over a daughter she couldn't afford to heal, working a job that stole from her, living a life that should have been so much more. I'm sorry, he whispered, and he wasn't sure if he was apologizing for feeling sick or for something infinitely larger. It's not your fault, Hannah said, misunderstanding. It's just how things are. People like us, we're not supposed to rise above our station. The system makes sure of that. She picked up her mop, her moment of vulnerability closing like a door. You should get back to your aisle before Thompson sees you. I've already gotten you in enough trouble. But AJ couldn't move. He stood frozen in aisle 5, staring at the woman whose life he'd destroyed, with a signature he couldn't even remember making. And for the first time in his carefully constructed existence, Alex Bradley understood the true cost of his success. AJ was still reeling from the revelation, his mind spinning through the cascading consequences of that single signature, when he heard the sharp click of dress shoes on linoleum. He turned just as Thompson rounded the corner, his face already twisted with fury. What the hell is this? Thompson's voice cracked through the aisle like a whip. Matthews, why aren't you working? And you? He jabbed a finger at AJ. I told you no talking. Hannah's face went pale. She grabbed her mop with trembling hands. I'm sorry, Mr. Thompson. I don't want to hear it. Thompson stepped closer, his bulk filling the narrow aisle. This is the 3rd time this week I've caught you standing around. You think you're special? You think the rules don't apply to you? No, sir. I was just taking a moment. A moment? Thompson's laugh was cruel. You're on my time, Matthews. Every second you're standing here crying is a second you're stealing from this company. Maybe that's why your checks keep coming up short. You're not actually working the hours you claim. AJ felt rage ignite in his chest. That's not. Did I ask you to speak? Thompson wheeled on him, his eyes cold. You've been here one day, and you're already a problem. You know what that tells me? It tells me you're not a good fit for the Bradley family. The irony of the phrase, the Bradley family, would have been funny if it weren't so obscene. She was upset, AJ said, his voice tight with controlled anger. I was checking if she was okay. That's called being human. Thompson's face flushed red. Being human doesn't stock shelves. Being human doesn't clean floors. You want to be human on your own time, not mine. He pulled a radio from his belt. Security, I need an escort to process a termination. You're firing me for talking to someone. AJ's hands clenched at his sides. I'm firing you for insubordination and failure to follow direct orders. Thompson's smile was thin and satisfied. You're done. Get your things and get out. Hannah stepped forward, her voice desperate. Mr. Thompson, please. He was just trying to help. Don't punish him because of me. Thompson turned on her with vicious speed. Oh, don't worry, Matthews. You're next on my list. In fact, I think it's time we had a conversation with your housing coordinator. What was her name again? Mrs. Chen? I'm sure she'd be very interested to know about your performance issues. The blood drained from Hannah's face. Please, please don't do that. I'll work harder. I'll stay later. Whatever you want. Whatever I want. Thompson leaned in, his voice dropping to a poisonous whisper. What I want is for you to remember your place. You're nothing, Matthews. You're a janitor with a sick kid, and no options. You think anyone cares about your sob story? You think corporate gives a damn if you can't make rent? He straightened, adjusting his collar with smug satisfaction. The beauty of this system is that there are 100 people just like you waiting to take your job. You're replaceable, disposable. And if you ever forget that again, I'll make sure you and your daughter are sleeping in your car by the end of the week. Hannah was crying again, silent tears streaming down her face, her body rigid with humiliation and fear. Other employees had started to gather at the ends of the aisle, drawn by Thompson's raised voice, but none of them intervened. They just watched with the hollow eyes of people who'd learned that survival meant keeping your head down. AJ looked at Hannah's face, at the broken resignation there, and something inside him snapped. The careful disguise he'd maintained, the meek acceptance of Thompson's authority, the pretense of being just another invisible worker, it all burned away in an instant. That's enough, he said, and his voice was no longer AJ's. It was the voice of a man who'd commanded boardrooms and bent markets to his will. It was the voice of Alex Bradley. Thompson turned, irritation flickering across his face. Excuse me? I said that's enough. Alex stood straighter, his entire bearing shifting. You're done here, Thompson. Thompson's face twisted with contempt. I don't know who you think you are, but I know exactly who I am. Alex reached up and tapped the collar of his blue shirt, pressing the small button hidden beneath the fabric. The microphone he'd been wearing since he walked through the door, insurance, his head of security had insisted, crackled to life. This is Bradley. I need a full security team at store number 1 immediately. Ring legal. The change in Thompson's expression was almost imperceptible at first. A flicker of confusion, a slight narrowing of the eyes. What are you? My name isn't AJ. Alex pulled off the cheap name tag and let it fall to the floor. It's Alex Bradley. And you work for me. The words hung in the air like a detonation. Thompson's face went through a remarkable transformation, confusion melting into disbelief, disbelief crystallizing into recognition, and recognition exploding into pure, undiluted terror. The color drained from his skin so quickly he looked like he might faint. Mr. Bradley? His voice came out as a strangled whisper. That's not, you can't be. Can't be what? Here? Alex took a step forward, and Thompson actually stumbled backward. Can't be standing in my own store, watching you extort my employees? Can't be listening to you threaten a single mother with homelessness because she dared to ask for the wages she's legally owed? The gathered employees were staring now, their expressions shifting from fear to something that looked like cautious hope. Hannah stood frozen, her hands still gripping the mop, her eyes wide with shock. Thompson's mouth opened and closed like a fish drowning in air. Sir, I can explain. There's been a misunderstanding. I was just what? Just stealing from Hannah Matthews? Just pocketing the labor costs you saved by forcing people to work off the clock? Alex's voice was cold, surgical. Just earning your quarterly bonus by terrorizing the most vulnerable people in this building? I was following company policy. Thompson's voice rose, desperate now. The efficiency metrics, the labor cost targets, those came from corporate. From you. The accusation hit its mark, and Alex felt it like a blade between his ribs. You're right, he said quietly. I created the system that made your cruelty possible. I signed the policies. I celebrated the numbers. I never once asked what those numbers actually meant. He paused, his voice hardening. But you took those policies and weaponized them. You turned efficiency into theft. You turned accountability into extortion. That wasn't in any manual I wrote. Thompson's eyes darted toward the exit, calculating. I want to speak to my union representative. You can't just... I can do whatever I want. I own this company. Alex tapped his collar again. Security, what's your ETA? A voice crackled back through the hidden speaker. 3 minutes out, sir. Legal is on the line. Thompson's face had gone from white to a sickly gray. Please, Mr. Bradley. I have a family. I have a mortgage. I was just trying to hit my targets. You have to understand. I understand perfectly. Alex's voice was ice. You saw people who couldn't fight back, and you hurt them because it was profitable. You saw Hannah Matthews, a woman who should have been a doctor, whose scholarship I took away, and you decided to take even more from her. He stepped closer, and Thompson pressed himself against the shelving. You thought you were untouchable in your little kingdom. You thought no one was watching. The sound of heavy footsteps echoed from the front of the store. 6 security officers in dark suits rounded the corner, moving with military precision. Behind them came 2 people in business attire carrying briefcases. The legal team. Thompson's legs seemed to give out. He sagged against the shelf, his face crumpling. Please, please, I'll fix it. I'll pay back every dollar. You'll do exactly what my lawyers tell you to do. Alex turned to the lead security officer. Escort Mr. Thompson to the office. Secure his computer, his files, everything. I want a full audit of every paycheck processed in the last 2 years. As security moved in, Thompson's eyes found Hannah, and for a moment something ugly flickered there. Blame, resentment, the impotent rage of a bully finally held accountable. But Hannah wasn't crying anymore. She stood straighter now, watching her tormentor being led away in handcuffs, and on her face was something Alex hadn't seen before. Hope. The security team escorted Thompson through the store in silence, past employees who had emerged from every aisle to watch. No one spoke, but Alex could feel the shift in the air, the collective exhale of people who'd been holding their breath for too long. As the automatic doors closed behind Thompson's retreating figure, someone started clapping. Then another. Within seconds, the entire store erupted in applause. Alex raised his hand, and the noise died down. Everyone, please. I need you to listen. He looked around at the faces, tired, wary, hopeful. What happened here is unacceptable, not just Thompson's actions, but the system that enabled them. I created that system, and I take full responsibility for it. He turned to Hannah, who still stood clutching her mop, looking like she might collapse at any moment. Miss Matthews, I need to speak with you, privately. She followed him to the manager's office, Thompson's office, though not for much longer. Alex gestured for her to sit, but she remained standing, her body tense with uncertainty. I owe you an apology, Alex began. Several, actually. But let me start with the biggest one. He pulled out his phone, his real phone, retrieved from the security team, and opened a file. 3 years ago, I signed an authorization to cut 20 students from the Bradley Foundation Scholarship Program. You were one of them. I did it to save $40,000, 0.01% of our foundation budget. I didn't think about the lives I was changing. I didn't think about you. Hannah's eyes filled with tears again, but these were different. You knew? Not until today. Not until you told me your story. Alex's voice was rough with emotion. I'm not asking for forgiveness. What I did was inexcusable, but I am asking for a chance to make it right. He pulled up another document on his phone and turned it toward her. Effective immediately, your Bradley Foundation scholarship is reinstated. Full tuition to state medical school, living stipend, books, childcare assistance for your daughter. Everything you should have had 3 years ago. Hannah stared at the screen, her hand trembling as she reached out to touch it, as if to confirm it was real. I don't. I can't. You can. And you will. Alex set the phone down. But that's not all. Thompson stole from you and at least 3 other employees. You'll receive full back pay for every hour you worked off the clock, plus damages. My legal team is already processing it. Mr. Bradley, Her voice broke. Why are you doing this? Because it's right, and because I need you to help me fix what I broke. Alex leaned forward. I'm restructuring the entire company. New oversight, new accountability measures, new ethics board. And I want you on it. A permanent seat, workers' advocate. You'll have direct access to me, veto power over policies that affect frontline employees, and the authority to investigate any complaint that comes through the system. Hannah sank into the chair, overwhelmed. I'm a janitor. I don't have a business degree. I don't. You have something more valuable than a degree. You have perspective. You know what it's like to be invisible, to be exploited, to be treated like you don't matter. Alex's voice softened. I need someone who'll tell me the truth, even when it's uncomfortable. Especially when it's uncomfortable. Will you do it? She looked at him for a long moment, searching his face for deception or pity. She found neither. What about medical school? You'll do both. The board meets quarterly, and we'll work around your class schedule. When you graduate, if you want to practice medicine full-time, the seat will be waiting for you whenever you're ready to return. Hannah wiped her eyes, and for the first time since he'd met her, she smiled. It was small and tentative, but it was real. Okay. Yes. I'll do it. Alex extended his hand, and she shook it. Not as employer and employee, but as partners in something larger than either of them. Outside the office, the store hummed with renewed energy. The invisible were visible now. The voiceless had found their voice. And Alex Bradley, standing in his wrinkled blue shirt in a manager's office that smelled of old coffee and broken dreams, finally understood what it meant to build something worth having. Sometimes the most powerful transformations don't happen in boardrooms. They happen in the aisles where real people work, struggle, and survive. Alex Bradley went undercover to find inefficiency, but he found something far more valuable, his own humanity. Hannah Matthews didn't just get her scholarship back. She got her voice back. And in doing so, she became the voice for thousands of others who'd been silenced by systems that valued profit over people. This story reminds us that behind every efficiency metric, every cost-cutting measure, every quarterly report, there are human beings with dreams, families, and dignity that deserves protection. The question isn't whether we can afford to treat people with compassion. The question is, what does it cost us when we don't? If this story moved you, here's what you can do. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it, a manager, a business owner, or anyone who's ever felt invisible in their workplace. Start a conversation about workplace dignity, fair wages, and the human cost of efficiency. Advocate for change in your own sphere of influence. Whether you're an employee, a manager, or a CEO, you have the power to make someone's day better or to change their life entirely. Subscribe for more stories that explore the intersection of power, justice, and human dignity. Because the most important stories aren't just entertaining, they're transformative. Remember, you don't need to be a billionaire CEO to make a difference. You just need to see people, really see them. What will you do with that power?